Climate neutrality by 2050 is Europe's greatest vision. But how do we make it a reality? To be effective, the green transition must leave no one behind. And all future-proof technologies and energy solutions must play a part. How can the European LPG industry play a significant role in meeting Europe's greatest pledge? The answer is BioLPG. Learn more about how this renewable and versatile fuel can reduce emissions when powering homes, transport, industry, and so much more. Together with Atlantic Consulting, Liquid Gas Europe developed a study on how BioLPG can support the pathway towards decarbonisation. And now we want to show you how the European LPG industry can be 100% renewable in 2050. Stay tuned for the launch and learn more about renewable energy and the needed policy interventions and industry actions to reach climate neutrality. BioLPG, a renewable pathway towards 2050.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual event on BioLPG and the pathway to Renewable 2050. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm going to be guiding us through today's conversation. Now, today we're going to be talking about how BioLPG fits in with the European Green Deal and its headline goal of getting EU emissions down to net zero by 2050. We're going to hear about exactly what BioLPG and biogases more generally are, and we'll have the presentation of a new study by Atlantic Consulting outlining a pathway for BioLPG. We'll hear from a panel of experts and policymakers about how BioLPG fits in with the larger emissions reduction picture. Now, here in the audience, we have a wide range of people who are interested in the renewable energy debate. We've had 400 registrations from around the world, and a look at our registration information shows that 45% of you out there are fuel suppliers, with about 20% coming from the world of policy as either policymakers or lobbyists. We also have NGOs, academics, and people from the heating and automotive sectors. You can also take part in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag BioLPG2050. You can see it right there above me in the background. So let's start out with a chat to learn exactly what BioLPG is. We saw in the registration information that a lot of you are from inside the industry, but a significant number are not. So you're probably curious, what is this BioLPG thing? Well, to find out, I'd like to bring in Samuel Mamqvist, General Manager of Liquid Gas Europe. Sam, welcome. Good to have you here with us today. Let me start out by asking you, for those in the audience who aren't familiar with LPG at all, can you tell us about this fuel in a few words?
Sure. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, everyone. I like very much starting with an easy question, so many thanks for that, Dave. LPG is essentially a combination of two gases, butane and propane. One of the main properties is that they can be easily liquefied, meaning that they're easy to store and to be moved around, either in cylinders or in bulk tanks. This means that they can practically be used literally anywhere, from the most exotic applications like hot air balloons or even developing torch, to the more mainstream usage like heating in rural areas, for instance. It's often considered a substitute for natural gas for both residential and commercial/industrial energy users in the many places in Europe where there is no access to the natural gas grid. It's also, very importantly, the most widely used alternative fuel on the market, with over 8 million vehicles across the EU. The LPG fleet of vehicles actually increases by around 5% every year, so clearly it's here to stay. Maybe 2 words to finish on their emission footprint of LPG. It's relatively low carbon compared to both liquid and solid fuels, which are predominantly used in rural areas. And very importantly, it emits virtually no harmful particulates. So that's obviously very important.
And how is BioLPG different from conventional LPG?
Dave, I know as moderator, it's your word to ask the questions, but if you allow me, I mean, let's reverse the exercise for a second. Let me ask you a question. Do you know by any chance the chemical composition of propane?
I do not, not offhand.
Well, shame on you. Well, if it's of any comfort, I suspect a lot of our participants, don't know that either. It's 3 atoms of carbon for 8 of hydrogen. So its chemical nickname, if you like, is C3H8. A follow-up question, an even tougher one. Do you know what is the chemical composition of BioLPG?
Also not, no. Is it similar?
It's exactly the same.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, okay, that's, I mean, the big difference between the two is obviously where it comes from. BioLPG comes from renewable feedstocks, but it's the exact same molecule as conventional LPG. Eric, the next presenter, will tell us more about that, about BioLPG composition and where it comes from later on, so I won't dwell on that for now. But okay, I mean, this little information, beyond trying to impress my kids with my primary school, chemistry knowledge. This information is important because it makes BioLPG what we call a perfect drop-in solution. In practical terms, it means that LPG and BioLPG can be blended together anywhere between 1 and 100%. And this has no impact whatsoever on the appliance that actually use the fuel. So it can be a heating boiler that you may have in your basement. It can be a bigger industrial furnace, or it can be an LPG car. So you may ask, okay, what's the point about this intended transition, from conventional LPG to BioLPG? Well, obviously, it's all about carbon emissions. BioLPG, very interestingly, comes, as I said, with the same composition, also with the same zero particulate emission profile as conventional LPG, but it does bring in addition a very stark reduction of the carbon footprint of up to 80%.
So, I mean, now that's very helpful to have, I think, to start out the event, to hear exactly what the difference is between regular LPG, bio-LPG, and what LPG is to start with. What do you hope that the audience takes away from today's event?
Well, off the top of my head, I guess, I mean, the first thing I want people to remember that, I mean, they've attended the best ever, online events. I guess that's the main one. But more seriously, I think we need to put this into context. The EU right now is preparing all sorts of legislative changes that we call the Fit for 55 package, which will be necessary to put into practice the very ambitious Green Deal decarbonization objectives. What we want people to keep in mind, after this event and during this event is that, and that's the main message, renewable gases like BioLPG have a key role to play towards full decarbonization in 2050. In fact, our industry feels so strongly about the role of BioLPG that it has made its pledge to actually have the whole LPG demand renewably sourced by 2050. So this is where we set our goal. We aim really high. And the presentation that will come actually after me will explain in more details how we are convinced that we can actually reach this really ambitious goal. Now, okay, looking back, BioLPG as a product, the first commercial batches of BioLPG have made their way to the European market only about 2 years ago. So let's face it, it's a relatively new product with still a relatively small market share, but it's growing rapidly. So that's obviously very positive. When we say, when I say that, okay, renewable gases have a key role to play, very importantly, we're not trying to pitch it against anything else. So we don't claim, to be clear, that this product should go against solutions like electricity, for instance, which is obviously the elephant in the room. What we see as a rule is that products like BioLPG and other renewable gases, they will be sitting next to it. For instance, as a complement to intermittent types of renewables, or in places where electric solutions are not fit for purpose, or even possibly, with hybrid solutions like thermosolar heating, for instance. Now, a very quick word, if I may, about diversity. Different energy users or different motorists from different regions, obviously will have different needs, and they may also face different obstacles towards carbon neutrality. I'm sorry, I'm probably stating the obvious here, but I think it's really important. Their ability to spend on mobility or heating is obviously a key limiting factor. This is why we think that affordable low emission solutions like LPG and BioLPG, they have a very critical void to fill on the market. Now, looking at this from a policy perspective, and that being said, I mean, despite all our ambition, we're perfectly conscious that the BioLPG potential towards carbon neutrality can only materialize if the right policy framework is put in place. And this matters in three main areas: regulatory recognition and certainty, support to users, and support to producers. So I just would like to close my introduction. I just wanted to cover these three items. Starting with regulatory certainty and recognition for BioLPG. BioLPG right now is covered by the biogas definition in RED II. This is the right place for it, because that's what it is. It's a renewable gas. The problem is that it's not explicitly mentioned within the definition, which means that many member states, they omit to include BioLPG in their supportive policies for biogas, which come from the implementation of RED II. And it's an area where we think that the upcoming RED III proposal in June can certainly help. Secondly, support to energy users. Incentives for consumers to switch from high emission fuels to low carbon solutions like LPG and BioLPG, these supportive policies, they need to be maintained or even amplified. And we think that this could be done, for instance, through various policy avenues, like the renovation wave, for instance, where support could be delivered to the retrofit of rural dwellings, for instance, but also very importantly in the upcoming revision of the Energy Taxation Directive. Well, as we all know, energy price is a powerful leverage to action change, but it has to be used very carefully. Otherwise, it may just make more harm than good. Last but not least, in terms of support to consumers, another key measure would be to maintain LPG and BioLPG in the current EU definition of alternative fuels on the transport side of things, as it is now in the AFID directive. I just wanted to finish here with one very important element, which is the support to producers. We have to bear in mind that BioLPG is predominantly a co-product from other renewable fuel production processes. Our LPG companies are investing massively to support the uptake of BioLPG on the market, but they cannot achieve our collective ambition if the production is not supported in the long term. So that's why we think that the renewable fuel producers need, for example, to be prioritized for EU R&D funds to develop some new and promising low TRL production processes. And very importantly, in the following phase, they also need supportive policies and subsidies to obtain a well-defined and a predictable timescale for upgrading and putting up to scale these production processes to allow these processes to mature and to become fully competitive. I'm sorry, I know it was a relatively long introduction and very meaty with a lot of food for thought, but I thought it was quite necessary to kick off this. Well, obviously, I cannot cover everything here, so I will just zip it there. But I would strongly encourage all our participants to actually go and have a look later on to our 2050 pathway for BioLPG documents, where they will find a lot more details about all of that. And well, I guess now, of course, like all our participants, all our attendees, I'm just very much looking forward to a very interesting panel discussion.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sam. I think that's really helpful to get that context before we start out. Now let's hear about the study that I mentioned earlier, the BioLPG 2050 Pathway Study. To hear about that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Johnson, who's Managing Director at Atlantic Consulting. Eric, tell us about the study that you guys have just concluded.
Thank you very much, Dave, and to Sam for the introduction, and good morning to all. I'm here to tell you about a study that I led last year for Liquid Gas Europe. The aim was to figure out how renewable the LPG industry could be in 2050. In the next 10 minutes, I'd like to tell you how we did that, what we found, and give my reflection on what that means for the industry and for government. As slide 2 shows, the method of the study, how we did it, falls into 3 main steps. First, we did a deep review of existing work. As many of you probably know, there's a lot of existing work. There are energy forecasts and scenarios and models all over the place. And some of these come from very authoritative institutions: European Commission, International Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency, plus a host of well-known consultancies and trade associations. We draw on these because 1, they are authoritative, 2, that aligns our work with existing work, and 3, we did not want to reinvent any wheels. Now, as it turns out, and we already knew this, the wheels that are invented mostly do not give a lot of detail in LPG. But with a lot of grinding away in Excel, the detail can be worked out, and so that's what we did. We started with a demand scenario to 2050, that would be sort of the middle rectangle there, based mainly on forecasts from the Commission, from the IEA, from the RENA, and also from Eurogas, and the German Umweltbundesamt, which is the German environmental agency. Finally, in the third rectangle, we worked out the corresponding supply scenario, that of biorefineries done by Konkawi, and that of biogas done by Eurogas and Navigant. Both the biorefinery scenario and the biogas scenario were based on feedstock availability as worked out by RENA together with the IEA. And that is to say that we were all working, these were all pretty much working from the same feedstock kind of scenario dating back to a study in 2016. The main part of our scenario, the one that we did for Liquid Gas Europe, was based on a specific scenario for 2050 that was developed by Konkawi. And I should note here that Konkawi has 17 scenarios in its study. We actually used about 3 of those. We sort of combined 3 of those. And they should have had a name, something to the effect of European Green Deal. By the way, Konkawi's study is public and it is published on the internet, but if you do not have much background in refining or LP modeling, well, good luck in understanding it. And even if you do have that background, as I do, it's a tough read, to be honest. But at the same time, it's a very thoughtful study. What Konkawi has done is to imagine a future of liquid biofuels supplied by refiners who today supply mostly liquid fossil fuels. There's a lot of sense in this. Who is better equipped with expertise, technology, and infrastructure to supply liquid fuels? And this is not just wishful thinking by refiners. The Konkawi refinery model has been adopted by the European Commission as its reference in EU legislation. So this isn't just anybody talking. So I'll point you to the next slide, which shows the first thing we learned. Demand is falling. Actually, the LPG industry knows this already. When boilers are replaced or built new, consumption in the new one is almost always less than the old one. It's often about half. This is all about efficiency of boilers, of buildings, and of heat management. Now, adding to the fall are another 3 factors. There's the rise of electrification, the resulting decline, to some extent, of gaseous fuels, and the death of solid fossil fuels, better known as coal. So let's go to the next slide to look at how that demand can be supplied in a decarbonized world. What the Konkawi model projects in its Green Deal scenario that we used is a major increase in 3 renewables pathways, as shown in the slide. You can see biorefining, gasification and pyrolysis, and power to X. And we added to this another pathway that the LPG industry has found in its own investigations. That'll be biogas conversion. Now, the LPG industry, by the way, is chasing all these pathways, plus a few others, to find BioLPG as we speak. These days, it's one of the biggest topics in the industry. It's really a boardroom issue. So in this next slide, here's the heart of our study. Based on Konkawi's scenario of liquid fuels and an added component of biogas conversion by the biogas/bio-LPG industry, we reckon that the European LPG market by 2050 can be 100% renewable. That's 100% renewable. The supply sources shown in this waterfall graph from left to right, they're the same sources you saw in the previous slide. They just now have assigned quantities, kilotons per year produced. The critical point here, though, is that one about 100% renewable. The supply from biorefining, gasification and pyrolysis and power to X is enough to meet the 2050 low demand case for LPG. That's the red horizontal line going off there, right, going across at around 8 million. If you throw in biogas conversion, the supply is more than enough to meet the high demand case, which is around 12 million. Now, if you might think we started with this and we worked backwards, as well, some studies do, but no, this was not a fix. We built our model honestly and without knowing the answer in advance, and we pushed the button. Of course, we were pleasantly surprised with the result, but the point is this was not a fix. And as we move to the next slide, just as this was not a fix, it also was, first, a scenario. And second, it was not a forecast. It was certainly not a year-by-year forecast. We painted a possible picture of the future. This is what could be, according to Conway and the Great and the Good. It is not what shall or must be. We also do not presume that the progress will be linear. What we can say today is that based on today's knowledge, the short-term commercial growth will probably be focused more on lipids and gasification. The longer-term growth, the longer-term commercial focus will shift towards power to X and biogas conversion. And that's Conway's view, it's our view as well, and that's the view of many others. So as we move to the next penultimate slide, the question is, what do we do now? Well, what I've seen over many years, and many others have seen the same, is that renewables rely very much on policy and regulation, and Sam was already saying that as well. Policy creates an enabling framework for renewables to grow and thrive. Without that framework, renewables will not grow, they will not thrive. It's really that simple. Or maybe it's that complicated, because the framework does get complicated, it can get very complex. And to give a bit of context here, I can tell you that long ago, I studied physical chemistry, which involved a lot of quantum mechanics. Now, in comparison to enabling frameworks for biofuels, quantum mechanics is easy. There's just nothing to it. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but the policy is key and it's complicated. And to make it work, we need full-on effort of the LPG industry and of government. We need cooperation, a lot of it, just as we've seen in other energy sectors like electricity. So it comes down to this: LPG is convenient, it's clean, it's economic, and it works for millions of consumers. So the challenge is to keep the convenient, clean, and economic part while also decarbonizing. And our study shows that at least in Europe, it can be done. And of course, our main aim is to satisfy those customers, the public, the voters. So let me close with this. Many of you have probably seen some of these action films. I watch some of these with my sons at times. It's Mission Impossible, that sort of thing. And at the climax, pretty much every time, usually the hero and the co-hero storm in to conquer the bad guys. And before they do, they look at each other and they say, "Let's do this." So I say to my friends in the LPG industry and my friends in government, and even to my non-friends, let's do this. Let's cooperate to make policy that brings the 100% scenario into reality. Let's do this. On the final slide, you'll see my email address. Drop me a line if you'd like to ask questions or discuss or tell me your view. I look forward to the journey of the LPG industry and governments traveling towards decarbonization together. Let's do this. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Eric. I could hear Arnold Schwarzenegger channeled in your voice. Arnold Schwarzenegger takes on BioLPG. I like it.
That's right.
Cool. So now we've heard from Eric what is possible. Let's talk about what is probable so we can see what can be done, but what's actually going to be done and what kind of policy do we need to make that happen? We've got our first poll question for you guys ready here. The question is, what is the most important element to ensuring renewable low carbon fuels like BioLPG are available? The options are a more holistic approach in measuring emissions in different policies, a renewable gas target, incentives and information for consumers to switch to cleaner fuels, incentives for refiners to produce and valorize renewable low-carbon fuels, or EU funding for R&D. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to make your decision. Okay, quick make your decision before we close the poll. And let's close it. So let's see what you all said. All right, so the winner is incentives for refiners. Interesting. So about 37% of you said that. The runner-up was incentives and information for consumers. So more of an incentive approach for people to proactively choose cleaner fuels. The lowest response was EU funding for R&D. Interesting. I think we'll talk more about the results of the poll when we go to the panel, which is right now. Let me introduce our panelists of experts. We can really dive into this. So with us here today, we have Galin Genchev, Policy Officer for Decarbonization and Sustainability of Energy Sources at the European Commission's Energy Department. We have Harman Dekker, Director of the European Biogas Association, EBA. We have Cécile Norga, Secretary General of UPEI, Europe's Independent Fuel Suppliers Association. And finally, we have Ilias Vezaios, Director for Low Carbon at advisory firm GemServe. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Galin, I have a question for you first on the policy front. Obviously, I mentioned at the beginning, we have these targets and strategies coming from the Commission. How does the Commission envision the role of renewable liquid gas and specifically BioLPG in the future fuel mix if the EU is going to meet these ambitious targets?
Thank you for the question, but first of all, thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to participate in this debate, which I think is quite timely and valuable for the future energy mix in a decarbonized world. So directly to the question, since we are short of time, as you all know, the last year adopted EU energy integration strategy clearly states what the vision is in order to achieve the increased climate ambition of the EU, and where basically the strategy clearly states that no one-fits-all solution is not, let's say, the solution, which means that only a mix of energy carriers based on the energy efficiency first principle can achieve that objective. From that point of view, obviously each energy carrier being sustainable from the point of view of the decarbonization has its role to play, including biogas or sustainable biofuels, specifically as the strategy clearly states, in areas which are difficult to decarbonize or let's say geographically difficult and have not access to the grid, so electrification is difficult. So for all this, the strategy clearly states that there is a role of biogas, for example, being sustainably produced. And it's also in terms of sustainability, as you probably know, we have also the recently adopted EU methane strategy, which is more focusing on cutting methane emissions, and there as well sustainability is at the core. So basically, let's say the strategic framework clearly sets the scene for a sustainable portfolio of energy solutions from the context of 2030, 2050. So having said that, my personal opinion as well is that the core of our discussion today is also about sustainability. So basically, what sustainability means in the context of biogas or BioLPG, since something important to stress at the very beginning is that we are not, as an institution, we're not promoting, let's say, very precise or individual solutions. I fully agree with what was said previously, is that the role of the institutions and the policy makers is to put the relevant framework. So the relevant framework to support this basically sustainable mixture or sustainable energy mix. And from that point of view, the core of our discussion is what sustainability means. As you know, in the policy framework, we started with first generation biofuels, and for the biogas, something important to mention, and the BioLPG, sustainability basically it's in the feedstock and the pathway. So basically, if the production can ensure a sustainability which is based on the right feedstock, let's say waste and residue, combined with such a pathway in a life cycle analysis in terms of emissions, which avoids any leakages or any, let's say, meets the thresholds and even goes beyond that, then such a sustainability solution has its role to play in the future energy mix. So from that point of view, I think for the BioLPG, the question is how to move from first generation, let's say, call it food-based or vegetable oils, which are based on crops, into more waste and residue solutions for the feedstock. And what are the pathways which, let's say, ensure close to zero emissions, I would say. So from that point of view, you know that there are several methodologies which are being developed by the Commission in the cooperation with the GRC to actually ensure that basically through certification, this is my last point, and the sustainability basically cannot be ensured and put on a level playing field without a EU-wide comprehensive certification system. And this is something which we are reflecting on also in our impact assessment for the revision of the RED II, of the Renewable Energy Directive. So basically, a certification system which is based on those principles, certifying fuels will first of all achieve the objective of consumer information, so to allow consumers to be informed to take the right decision, and also for policymakers, I would say, in the member states, to take the right decisions when promoting specific energy solutions. I think I'll finish with this just by saying that, as rightly mentioned, the framework at the level of the Commission or at the EU tries to put this framework, which may be going through adjusting the scope of the Renewable Energy Directives in terms of terminology, as was mentioned. But in any case, let's say the solution, I think, would come from the supply of sustainable BioLPG. So I think this is core, and this afterwards will meet the demand of specific niche markets, as was mentioned, geographically remote, or some specific segments in the transport sector, which will be difficult to decarbonize.
Cecile, I want to turn to you next. Given the survey results that we had, I think it's interesting to get your perspective on this. Are fuel distributors prepared to increase the use of BioLPG?
Well, thank you, Dave. And first of all, good morning to everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Liquid Gas Europe, for having me on the panel. I will respond to your question, but first I would like to say a word about who we are so that you really understand where we come from on this issue. So I represent UPI. UPI is the European Association representing the fuel supply chain. So our members operate from the gate of production sites or from import terminals until the point where the fuel is sold to the final customer. And they represent around 30% of the fuel demand in Europe. And our members are typically independent, medium and small companies and family-owned companies. And there are some key features of UPI membership. Many of our members are retailers. So that means that they have a direct contact with consumers, and they really respond to demand they witness on the market. Our members also have assets. They have tank terminals, storage, trucks, depot, and down to retail stations. And they can repurpose this infrastructure to supply sustainable renewable fuels. And finally, our members are not energy producers. So that means that we don't have a stake in a particular fuel, but on the contrary, they have the capacity to adapt quickly to a changing regulatory environment or evolving consumer demand to supply new type of fuels. Now, as an association, we are fully committed to the climate neutrality objective. We have ourselves published back in 2019 our 2050 vision for the sector. And we believe that there is a role to play for electricity, for hydrogen, as well as a wide range of liquid and gaseous renewable fuels. And combining all these solutions, according to us, is the best way to effectively and cost efficiently reduce emissions to achieve this climate neutrality objective. And I would like to insist on the convenience and the readiness of drop-in solutions. Drop-in solution, as it was explained before, I mean that a renewable fuel can be mixed into a conventional fuel at a different percentage and without any change to the vehicles or the infrastructure. And we have across Europe many drop-in solutions already. HBO is one of them, is currently produced and mature, but also biomethane or power to liquids and many others. And actually BioLPG is one of these drop-in solutions. And obviously UBI members are eager to distribute it when it's fully available on the European market. And for us it is key because it can displace the current fossil LPG use both in heating and in transport, and it can help fuel distributors to meet their targets and ultimately to meet their commitments to climate neutrality. So the response in short is yes.
Great, let's take a question for Harman next. Do you think, Harman, that we'll have enough sustainable feedstock available to make renewable liquid gas a main part of the sustainable fuel mix in the future, or might there potentially be a sustainable feedstock problem?
Well, thank you, Dave. And first of all, I have to say thank you as well as the previous panelists as well to have us here on this great webinar. It does show that I think the fuels are actually are the important part and not the technology. So it's great to see so many attendees already, and the European Biogas Association is actually at the heart of also a solution for the BioLPG part. So that is good to notice. So towards your question, and Eric already referred to the various studies, the International Energy Agency, Eurogas, Gas for Climate, and actually those studies have an update as well made in 2020. Actually they are looking at sustainable feedstocks for the production of biogas. Good to know is that we're already producing quite a lot. So if we're looking at the total production of biogas within Europe, energy content-wise, we produce as much as the whole country of Belgium is using in gas intake, so in fossil gas. So we can actually already make a whole country green in its gas supply. If we translate that to the million tons of oil equivalent, and as it has been expressed in Eric's report, we produce now 16.5 million tons of oil equivalents. LPG needs by 2050 3.9 million tons of oil equivalent. So within that already we can do it. Looking ahead of what we can do in 2050, the potentials are being expressed in sustainable feedstock. Important to stress, because we do not want to use any feedstocks which is displacing food or feed. And within that, we already can produce by 2050, and this is a careful estimate, we can already produce 100 billion cubic meters, or expressing it again, 1 million tons oil equivalent, 84 million tons of oil equivalent, returning to what is needed for BioLPG. This will be around about 5% of the total demand. So yes, it is possible, and bear in mind those estimates are on the careful side.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's really good to know that layout of the supply situation. Ilias, let's go to you next. How do you see the role of BioLPG in the future energy mix?
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm delighted to be a part of this discussion, and it's been extremely informative so far. So I think I've been involved in the climate policy debate for over 15 years, and this is a very exciting time in this space. So we see governments driving the decarbonization targets towards net zero across Europe. And I think this is critical, and it seems that there is support for it from governments, from consumers, but also from businesses. But although there is willingness, the transition will not be easy. So what we're asking is consumers and businesses to change the way that they use energy, but also pay a bit extra for their heat or their energy. So the transition won't be straightforward. I was looking at a recent survey by Savanta Comres, which I believe actually was carried out on behalf of Eurogas, and just 21% of consumers are willing to change their heating system to reduce climate change. So there is a lot of willingness. That transition will not be easy. And I think for this reason, it is very important to focus more on those areas of our economy that are harder to decarbonize or harder to treat. So I think domestic heat, particularly off-grid heat, is one of these areas. Parts of the industrial and the commercial sector, larger vehicles, mobile generators, and so on and so forth. So these areas sometimes don't get the attention that they deserve, but they're absolutely critical to meeting net zero targets. And then I suppose moving on to domestic heat, which is an area that I'm personally very interested in, have engaged within the debate for years in a technology agnostic manner. The retrofit, so retrofit heating is going to be very, very difficult to deal with. So more than 70% of buildings are going to be around in Europe by 2050. So we need to find a way to decarbonize these. And then we know that 40 million buildings are located in rural off-grid areas. These are areas where there's greater prevalence of fuel poverty. The building stock is older. And these are also areas that use high carbon fossil fuels. So we know that in countries like Poland, Germany, the UK, which is now out of the EU, but still of great interest for me, France, Belgium, these are areas that have a significant share of heating oil and coal, which needs to be phased out. So I think in this space, which is hard to treat off the gas grid in rural areas, BioLPG could have a role to play as part of a mix of technologies and solutions. It is a fuel that uses existing infrastructure, so it is a drop-in fuel, which is important because it comes without the hassle and upfront cost. It has a low air quality footprint, which is favorable compared to some other solutions like biomass. But it also sort of has the flexibility, it's easy to store. So it has some properties that make it quite attractive for the rural off-grid space, but also particularly for those buildings that are harder to treat. So in a nutshell, I suppose the response is yes, it does have a role as part of a wider mix. And I think whether it succeeds or not, it will also depend on policy recognition. We refer to sort of standards, the need for regulation, and the need to recognize its benefits and sort of on par with some of the other low carbon heating solutions out there. So I'm really excited to see what happens next and how the fuel deploys moving forwards.
Makes sense. So we've got lots of good questions coming in from the audience. Thank you guys for those. But before I get to those, I have a question for you, the audience. We have one more poll question for you. Let me pull that up now. The question we're asking you is, what is the most relevant advantage of BioLPG given the EU's pledge? Flexibility as a drop-in ready fuel, affordability as a cost-effective means for a just transition, no new infrastructure investments needed, carbon savings up to 80% compared to conventional LPG, or air quality improvement, virtually no pollution emissions. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that. So the majority said carbon savings up to 80%, the plurality, I should say, rather than majority, carbon savings up to 80% compared to conventional LPG. So it's the carbon savings that seem to be the most interesting to you all out there. The less interesting was the affordability aspect, the cost effectiveness, and the air quality improvement. That's interesting. So I just have a couple more questions for you guys, and then I'm going to ask some of the questions that have been submitted by the Q&A. Cecile, I wanted to ask you a question. We've talked about consumers, and I think actually that poll question seems to suggest that even consumers are also concerned about climate, maybe even more or equally so as cost effectiveness and affordability. From your perspective, what are consumers most worried about regarding the climate impacts of the fuels they use?
Thank you, Dave. Yes, indeed. I think, and we've seen that, especially in the recent years, the consumers' awareness of climate change has increased significantly. I think I've seen a poll from Eurostat saying that over 90% of consumers take climate change very, very seriously. So it's an important change in the mindset. Now, the challenge is, for example, individual mobility keeps being a priority for people. And we have also to see what's the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on that. I think people want to retain their individual mobility means. So, and in the heating sector, it's the same challenge. I mean, Ilias stat was interesting. Very few people are actually, in spite of this awareness of climate change, are actually keen on changing the boiler only for a climate change purpose. So this is why bringing the sectors to climate neutrality will certainly be a challenge. I think consumers keep worrying mainly about affordability and convenience. I think affordability is clear. We have to make them aware of the total cost of ownership of different options. And we need also to ensure that there are the adequate taxes and demand side incentives in order for consumers to be able to make that switch and make it more attractive to them. And convenience is also a very important factor. It includes the availability of infrastructure, for example, the consumer friendliness of different options. But I think all that is also a matter of perceptions, because, for example, today you have one charging point for a battery electric vehicle, but still consumers don't think it's enough. So I think the key here is really communication. I think it's important to really address misperceptions about alternative and sustainable solutions through increasing communication, targeting both private and commercial users, because the transition will only happen if consumers are committed to it. As members of UPI are fuel retailers, we've done a lot of communicating at the level of the retail station through fuel labeling, as you might have seen at your retail station, through more recently fuel price comparison initiatives. But so a lot has been done by suppliers already. I think what we're missing now is national campaigns really raising awareness and addressing misconception about alternative and renewable fuels.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially the importance of the labeling there. Harman, I have a question for you. You've got a policymaker here with us in the panel. What would you say you need from policymakers to be able to have your industry committing to these investments that we're talking about here?
That's a very good question, and a question which pops up almost every day. We are working as a European Biogas Association, as well as your association within Europe. Actually, the thing is that within the politics, we have really focused on the easy to achieve and to understand fuels like electricity. And I think we must understand that if we look at all the fuels which are available from fossil-based, those are plentiful. So you have the oil, you have kerosene, you have heavy oils, natural gas, petrol, diesel, and coal, and you can go on. You have so many different ways of fossil fuels. And I think this is the type of thinking we need for the green fuels as well. There is not one green fuel. We need many green fuels. So we need to focus on the type of fuel we are going to use, not on the type of technology, because the type of technology could limit us. So look at the total fuels which are there and then stimulate them all, because there is no silver bullet. There is no only hydrogen or only electricity. We need all those fuels all together. So what we see for particular our area, the biogas side, is that we already see that the production side is getting more attention. But on the consumer side, like for BioLPG, we must understand that this needs to be supported in legislation as well. So it's not about technology. We need to be technology neutral to make sure that all fuels are going to be implemented.
Thanks a lot, Harman. Galen, I had a question for you about the Renewable Energy Directive, and I'm actually going to combine it with a question we've received from the audience as well. This is from Giovanni Perella. He's from the Ministry of Economic Development of Italy. So my question for you about the RED is what the new revision, the so-called RED3 proposal, can deliver in terms of regulatory certainty for producers and distributors of renewable gases moving forward, and what would be the pros and cons of possibly introducing a legally binding renewable gas target, which I know has been discussed. And then also, if you could address, Giovanni has asked, in Annex 3 of the RED II directive, so the existing one, it seems to be clearly identified biopropane, what you referenced that is missed. So if you take those three questions there.
Okay, on the first question, as I briefly mentioned, basically there are several considerations in the policy mix in order to achieve the raised ambition. The projections clearly show that the current, for example, the current objective is about at a minimum of 32% of renewables, and this, if achieved, will be probably easily achieved, but it will not be enough to reach the full decarbonization. So we need to raise our targets. And the point is now what energy mix. One of the, let's say, one of the policy, how to say, the policy mix is how to work on the incentives which already exist and to increase a bit the targets, but mainly for the BioLPG, I think the considerations are more how to include such solutions in the scope, in the legislative scope of the RED II. So we are also thinking about different terminology definitions combined with the traceability of specifically for gases. One of the issues is how to combine, for example, the existing mass balance system with the book and claim system in such a way that to bring demand and supply closely. Because basically one of the obvious problems we have today is that through, for example, issuing of guarantees of origin, this is basically detached from any physical link where the fuel or the solution is produced and consumed. And also this raises also the question of traceability, double claiming, all these things which actually undermine the sustainability label of all sustainable energy solutions. From that point of view, we're trying to focus, as also clearly stated in the EU hydrogen strategy and the system integration strategy, we are focusing on developing a EU-wide comprehensive certification system to cover all energy carriers, including biogas, including hydrogen. So this is this basically will give the opportunity of energy carrier to show its sustainability potential to the consumers and to member states. Something important to mention is that as far as the renewable energy directive is concerned, we try to create a framework for all EU member states. So we are basically trying to put some harmonization, some rules to have a level playing field in all these areas. But in the end, the member states are the policymakers that need to make their choices in their national climate and energy plans, how to reach their national targets. So what we're trying to do through the common EU framework is to support them and to encourage them to take the right decisions. And this certification system I mentioned is a tool to, let's say, promote such fuels like the BioLPG if they can show sustainability, and if they can show, let's say, sustainability in terms of supply of enough quantity, and sustainability in terms of cutting emissions, or being emission savers compared to the fossil comparators. So from that point of view, we are looking at different solutions in terms of targets. Regarding, so to reply to your question on the specific target for gas, I think it has been considered and discussed lengthily. The question for me here, it's my personal opinion, is that I would say it's better basically to promote sustainable solutions and to leave the choice to member states and consumer to take that solutions, rather than imposing such demand side, let's say, consumption targets. Since from my point of view, it will be better to promote those solutions, and also to different policy streams, also for rural areas, rather than let's say, how to say, administratively prescribing what. So afterwards the question would be, what should be the target? 10%, 11%? And this is a bit, I would say, arbitrary. The best from my personal point of view is that let's say specific solutions like the BioLPG are certified as sustainable, and this will promote them in the energy mix of the future, I would say. And the third very concrete question, so I'll take note of that and have a look at if I don't know from who it came from the Annex 3. What can you repeat that?
Yeah, it came from Giovanni Perella from the
Okay.
Ministry of Economic Development in Italy. It's about in Annex 3 of the RED II directive. It seems to be biopropane seems to be clearly identified.
Yeah, it's basically in the Annex 3. Those are basically the energy content, so of the fuel. So it's if any, let's say, any adjustment in the terminology also would result in respective changes in those annexes, also default values on the Annex 5, and also the list of energy content of fuels under Annex 3. But this is more technicalities. So I would say our main work and reflection right now is how to adjust the directive in such a way that it covers all potentially sustainable solutions of the future. So to give that opportunity to member states and consumers in the end, I would say.
Okay. We have a question here about the use of palm oil. Elias, I want to put this to you, since I know a lot of businesses, as soon as they start hearing about biofuel, because of everything that's happened policy-wise here in Brussels over the past years, their mind goes to these types of controversies. So this question comes from Lucas Casabon. He says, a largely discussed downside about the production of most bio-LPG today is the use of palm oil. What alternatives are already available in the necessary quantity and actable cost? If a business is worried about that, what's your answer to that?
I'll answer this as good as I can. So first of all, I believe that there is already some provision on the phase out of palm oil by 2030, which so inevitably the sort of member states will have to work towards that direction. And I think Eric Johnson's study is quite telling on alternative ways of producing biopropane as a byproduct of HVO, but also power to X, and so on. So there is a diversity of options. I think down the line, ideally, the sort of biopropane should be produced nationally and consumed nationally, and this is definitely something that countries such as the UK, for instance, are interested in. So I think there is a diversity of options in terms of production as well as feedstock, and there is a concrete objective in terms of phase out of palm oil that I'm sure European states are working towards. So I think this is, this is something that is already happening. I'm sure Eric Johnson's has produced ample material on different options in terms of production that you can refer back to.
Yeah, let's bring in Eric to this discussion. Eric, if you could turn on your video and your mic. I also have a question for you from the audience. So there's a question from Jordi Vrucht. Where will the feedstock for BioLPG come from? Certainly it cannot be shipped from long distances. It wouldn't be economically or environmentally acceptable. And also you need a bioplant in your own country because transporting the biofuel will be too expensive and then it won't be adopted by consumers. Yeah, if you could answer those two questions, if you could touch on the palm oil issue and also on this question of where the feedstock comes from.
Right. On palm oil, I think briefly I would say that there are a number of new oils, what we call lipids is sort of the more technical word. There's a number of new oils and fats that are potential feedstocks, which would be wastes, basically. And also there's waste oils, there's algae, which is an area of a lot of interest. There is sewage sludge, which of course is around in huge quantities, and then there are things like jatropha, which is a plant. It looks like an avocado, but it's not. It's actually a non-edible plant, which can grow with almost no water in practically desert areas. So they can plant this stuff and get the oil. So there's a number of new ideas that are being pursued about new feedstocks, new oils, new fats. The thing about distance and producing in your own country, to be honest, I disagree with that, because if you look at long distance transport of all sorts of things, including fuels, usually the carbon footprint of that is really minor. I mean, it's typically well under 5% of the overall life cycle footprint. So yeah, so basically I guess I just don't agree with that. I don't really agree either with the idea that it has to all be in the own country as such, because again, if you look at fuels markets as they exist now, that's certainly not the case, and I don't see why that would have to suddenly be the case. The thing, although the caveat on that would be that to some extent, when you start using biofeedstocks, although people will probably get better at this, they tend to be pretty bulky and they're not that easy, and so a lot of times the idea of building some sort of a biomass type plant is one of the biggest restrictions, is the logistics of getting all the wood or the corn stover or the straw, or whatever you're trying to get it there at an economic price. The thing about feedstock is basically that when you look at that from sort of the IRENA did this big study, International Renewable Energy Agency did this really good study about 2016, something like that. Like I said, and I think I mentioned in my remarks that that's sort of the basis of what a lot of people are looking at. And basically, the number one feedstock out there at the moment is biomass of different kinds. That would be non-edible plants, basically. That's by far the biggest volume that's out there. Waste is probably number two, and this surprised me when I did the work, is that waste is actually much less available than biomass. I would have thought the other way around until I looked at it, but that's how it works. The ultimate feedstock is, of course, the sun, and really that's what would drive power to X primarily. And that, if we can ever make that work economically, it's kind of like free energy. It's like free fuel. If you can make it work. And there's a lot of progress going on. And I think maybe the analogy we could look at is if you look at photovoltaic and even wind power for that matter, if you go back 15, 20 years, basically all the experts said this will never be economic. This will never be economic. Well, now it is. Now that's actually the most economic source of new build electric generation. So these things can change. I mean, people with smart technology can do a lot of good things.
Eric, I've got two more questions for you from the audience. First one comes from Olivier Cavon. Could you clarify BioLPG versus renewable LPG? Is it just a semantic debate, or is there a real difference? Sam mentioned in the beginning it's the same chemical composition code. Then we have a question from Lauren Scott, same vein. To be clear, is BioLPG a blend of biopropane and biobutane to adjust vapor pressure, or is it just 100% biopropane, or does it vary in different markets? So if we could take those two questions about the difference.
Right, I'll take the second one first. The thing about BioLPG, whether it's propane or butane, the commercial stuff that's out there today is pretty much exclusively biopropane, just because of the chemical nature of the way it's manufactured. There is a small amount of biobutylene that is being produced, which I guess the properties are pretty close to that of biopropane. But I mean, in principle, you could make mixtures and you can make different things. I mean, it's going to be one of those things where the supply and the demand have to figure each other out, you know, so to speak. But I mean, potentially, yes, but at the moment, all biopropane. The second question about BioLPG versus renewable LPG, renewable LPG is a higher class, and then BioLPG is a subclass of that. In that there are, I mean, you can do bio to get renewable, but you can do other things, and I forget the word that people have been using, you know, inorganic or something like that. Anyway, for instance, if you take power to X, let's say, there's no bio as such involved. So it is renewable in the way people tend to think of that, but it's not bio.
That's interesting. Harman, I have a question here from from the audience. This is from, I think the name is in an opposite order, Natalia de Almeida Menezes. So what is the role of LPG suppliers toward the BioLPG transition in countries where there is no strong climate policies? So in places where the climate policies might not be motivating it, how can the LPG suppliers enable that transition?
Well, maybe this is also a question for Cecile to answer after me, so I'll leave this maybe also for her. But what we see in those countries, we are a little bit behind on the renewable energy agenda, as to say, that those countries have also vast rural area which is not connected to a gas grid. And just to pick up on that, I think especially in those areas, to develop those rural areas which are there, I think biogas, as one of the developers, can actually help in sustainable farming in a very cost-effective way, as well as creating the renewable energy for which we can make the BioLPG as well. So now we have created, if we do it in this way, we can help those countries to develop the rural areas in a very sustainable way and provide BioLPG for the off-grid solutions to heat their homes in a very local way. So there we have, I think, two advantages to address.
Cecile, let me put the same question to you.
Yes, indeed. Happy to react as well. Well, first of all, I think it's not a question for all the countries in Europe, because in Europe it's clear that there are significant efforts into that direction, and I think all the countries have climate targets and renewable targets. So I think the policy agenda is really driving it in Europe. I think maybe outside Europe it might not be the case, but so beyond the policy drive, I think there is definitely an element of costs and in investment that is critical to the success of sustainable renewable fuels or a gas such as BioLPG. Now, there are certain elements that can also make a difference, maybe start closing this gap a little bit. First of all, as Harman has explained, I think there is a matter of sometimes, for example, agriculture production, there are some feedstock available, some waste and residues that can be valued by being turned into biofuels. I think that is very true, and we should take advantage of these in a circular economy objective. And then you also have companies that have their own commitment, commitment to reduce their emission, and are happy to develop some solution that might not be cost effective as such. But I think these are a couple of elements that can also help bridging the price gap. Now, if I may, Dave, I would like to react on this question that we discussed before about the policy environment. I think it's very important to keep a technology open policy environment. And I agree with Galin said before, it's not about setting specific targets for specific technologies, but more about keeping it open with an overall target for renewable, for example, and potentially sub-targets per sector in order to acknowledge all the differences in terms of the sector's condition, the CO2 abatement costs, etc. And I think something that is also very important is to ensure policy consistency. I think with the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive that is upcoming, it's important not to question what was previously agreed, but to increase the level of ambition, to expand the scope. But investments have been made on the basis of the current framework. And I think in Europe, we are fortunate to have strong sustainability criteria in place, ILUC criteria, greenhouse gas emission criteria for all the renewable fuels that are put on the market. And I think as such, now we need to prioritize volumes to really kickstart this market.
Elias, did you have a comment?
Yeah, sort of. I think I agree with the comments of Cecile. So I feel sometimes the discussion around particularly heat decarbonization can be a bit zero-sum. So hydrogen against biofuels against electrification, when actually we probably need a mix, and this is important for all decarbonization vectors if we are to succeed with consumers and their acceptance. I think it's very interesting to also see how technologies may interplay. I will refer you to the sort of Freedom project that took place in the UK, which shows how heat pumps can work together with LPG in hybrid systems. And that can bring significant cost reduction for consumers, but also carbon reductions. I think for BioLPG in particular, the risk is that it falls between the cracks. And I would agree that national policy has also an important role to play in terms of carbon recognition. I thought Galin's comments about regulating sustainability elements at the European level are important, because this is a gap as well. And I think there are some important national examples like France and Germany of recognizing BioLPG that other markets can look towards. So it's important to emphasize the agnostic element but the synergistic element as well.
Galen, I have a question for you about how the information we've been presented by Eric might have implications for the EU's emissions trading system. This question comes from Massimo Portioli. Given that the use of BioLPG reduces CO2 emissions by at least 80%, what are the sectors that could benefit from CO2 credits under the ETS, and which actors in the chain, producers, managers, users, etc.?
Yeah, this is a question for my colleagues in DG Clima, but I would just say that actually, as you probably know, there's also a revision in that area as well. So if, for example, the transport sector will enter that area, then this basically will be a way of profiting also the transport sector in the emission trading system. So then this will enlarge the potential. I just wanted to make a comment on the sustainability again, based on what our discussion was, and as we all agreed, basically that a systemic solution is the answer. So there is no let's say, but in an important, I think, consideration, looking at the different technologies and feedstocks available, is that we talk about let's say renewable or bio or not bio solutions, and something which could be considered as well is that the fact that waste is basically could be bio but is not renewable, since let's say the availability is fluctuating of the waste. This is one thing I would like to mention. And the second, in this kind of projection of the future, as you probably are aware, there are many advanced biofuels looking at the same feedstocks you're looking at, like the used cooking oil, for example, or the fats, which are already mentioned in the Renewable Energy Directive. So basically, this, I think, is the difficulty in the sense that all these projections should look at the other segments of the supply, how they plan to evolve, and whether basically there'll be enough renewable but limited resources as feedstocks. And this is, and from that point of view, we always say let's say the innovative or the future is in untapped potential feedstocks like algae, or like some some biomass which is grown on unfertile, or like it was mentioned in Eric's presentation of the options. So I think to find a place in that energy portfolio of the future, it will be very important to find the right feedstock mix in terms of its let's say limited availability, to put it this way. From the point of view of the evolution of the other segments of the supply. So because there are many industries looking at it, I think.
Harman, I want to get your thoughts on that. And also, I just want to take one last question, which is also for you. This is from the former MEP, Kieran Hartley. He says, I see a fundamental issue within the biogas LPG industry. There is no complete joined up strategy being put forward by the industry to the policymakers, and the policymakers are getting a mixed and confusing message. So if you could come in on the previous point, and then also maybe address that question as well from the former MEP.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Yes, to comment first on what Colin was saying, I think it is very important to look at the feedstocks and how that's going to be used. So which sectors is going to be used, which is going to profit from, say, the waste streams, and how you're going to use that, the utilization. However, we have to bear in mind that I think, or not thinking, I think that the reports are out there that on the feedstocks for biogas, which is also a precursor for the BioLPG, are clear. There is enough feedstock, and the good message here is we are actually producing quite a lot already in Europe, and we can scale up very quickly. So it's available and scalable, and the feedstocks which have been researched are all sustainable, so it can be made locally. And that would also answer the second point towards what the former MEP said. Yes, we have quite a difficulty, I think, in our message, because if we are comparing, say, the renewable energy we produce with other renewable energies, then sometimes we are not the full top. We are not maybe scoring the 100%, but we're scoring the 95%. But what a lot of people are forgetting is we are solving a lot of other problems which the other alternative energy sources cannot do. So we solve a problem on the sustainable farming. We solve a problem on ensuring that so the chemical fertilizers are not being used, and we can revitalize the soil. So there are many other aspects to it. And to think about as well what the Joint Research Center in Europe has researched already various times. If you look at the total chain of the carbon emission savings, which we can, the BioLPG, biogas can do, we are actually the best in total. If we look at the total chain from production to the end of the use, even when comparing to so other fuels. Still, I would stress, we need all of the fuels. We need all, so to be technology neutral. So if we, and maybe I can mention, we are working actually to address this point with the former MEP said. We are working on that. We are looking towards a biomethane alliance, like the Hydrogen Alliance, to ensure that we really are going to push together with the industry and also with Europe to see how we can solve all the barriers which are there and make sure that we can make use of it all at all.
Well, that's all the time we have for the panel. I want to thank the audience for some really great questions. Of course, we weren't able to get to all of them, but the good news is you guys will be able to continue this discussion at the upcoming UPN LPG e-Congress, which we will hear more about in a moment. But now I would like to introduce Maria Mamqvist, Managing Director of the Swedish Gas Association, for some concluding remarks. Maria?
Thank you very much, Dave. And I would also like to add, I'm also the Vice President of Liquid Gas Europe. So this is very close to my heart, of course. Thank you for the introduction, of course, and a big thank you to all the speakers and the participants in today's event. I'm very honored to have the closing remarks. And as you have heard today, we have an exciting and challenging future ahead of us, where we all have to work together to make it come true. And as pointed out in the beginning, leave no one behind. We have very ambitious goals within EU and also on national levels. To make the goals come true, we need all renewable solutions that we have on the market, as Cecile and others stated today. And of course, BioLPG is being one of them. As Galen pointed out earlier today, there are no silver bullets, no one solution fits all. It's also important to promote different sustainable solutions and leave it up to all countries to decide what solution to go for. We need a technology open view for all different solutions. They are all needed to make this change. I want to conclude that the LPG business are committed to contribute to the transition that is needed to reach the goals. There is no doubt about that. We are ready to offer solutions in all sectors, both heating, industrial and transport. And there is a huge potential for renewable gases. And as stated earlier today, we have multiple renewable pathways going forward to reach 100% BioLPG in 2050. The business has to ensure that the feedstock is sustainable from example, from waste and residues. Also, Harman means that this is very important and said that there are already today a huge amount of renewable gases on the market. Important questions have been raised today around palm oil, feedstock, long distance transport and EU ETS, and they were all answered by the experts on the panel. And through the polls today, you have altogether concluded that the most important element to ensure that renewable low carbon fuels are available is the incentives for refiners to produce and valorize renewable low carbon fuels. That was 37%. On second, we talked about incentives and information for consumers to switch to cleaner fuels. This is of course also very important since there will not be a straight way forward due to, amongst others, extra costs and changed behaviors, as Elias pointed out. But since the awareness of the climate crisis has raised, there is also an important change in mindset today compared to earlier. In the second poll, you have also concluded that the most relevant advantages of BioLPG is the carbon savings, followed closely by no new infrastructure investment needed. These are, of course, important issues. Even though these are the winners, it does not mean that all other answers are wrong. On the contrary, all answers are correct and equally needed to shape the future. There are huge businesses out there that want to contribute to the energy transition, and it's very important to get long-term commitments also from the policymakers in Brussels and elsewhere. This goes both for the regulatory side and for support to energy user and to producers of renewable gases. As you have heard today, there is a convergence of interest regarding renewable gases, and I'm sure there will be new alliances between actors that will deliver solutions now and in the future. Like Eric said, it is not mission impossible. Let's do this together. I wish all of us good luck, and I'm looking forward to walk the BioLPG pathway together with you. I do hope you think this has been the best ever online event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. And I can also hear you channeling Arnold Schwarzenegger in your "Let's do this" entreaty. Now, a little bit more information about that upcoming e-Congress that I promised you guys, where we can get to even more of the questions that you have about BioLPG. We have a little video to give you a little teaser of the event coming up. Let's play that video now. So save the date for the upcoming September. Hopefully by then we will be living in a different world than we are today, fingers crossed. But thank you all so much. I want to really thank the panelists for some excellent interjections there. I know I learned a lot, especially from the study and about really the possibilities moving forward here as we look toward 2050. As we mentioned, the EU has quite a lot of ambitious goals, and it's still to be determined how the EU is going to meet them. So it's good to hear some of the possibilities that we have. Now, if you'd like to go back to anything we discussed today, you will be able to find that online. It's going to be available on the LGE Liquid Gas Europe website. As you can go back, or if you want to recommend this for anyone who couldn't make it, be sure to send them to that website and they can find the video. So thank you to the audience for asking some great questions. Thank you to the panelists and the speakers for some great insights. And thank you at home for following along and spending your morning with us. I wish you a great afternoon.